The opioid crisis. Who, what, where, when, how, and why. Let's start off with what are opioids. Opioids are chemicals that bind to the receptor within the body that produce endorphins, enkephalin, and oxytocin. There are two types, endogenous or synthetic. Endogenous means having an internal cause or origin, so these kinds of opioids are made naturally and are processed all the time. Synthetic is a term for the secondary medication that stimulates opioid receptors. When the body takes synthetics, they overstimulate the receptors, causing pain to be blocked and an excessive amount of chemicals to be processed, causing the person to enter a state of ecstasy. In the 1990s, questions arose about whether synthetic opioids could become addictive, but big pharma companies assured healthcare professionals that they would not, letting them prescribe these medications at a skyrocketing rate. Widespread misuse of these medications led to 50,000 deaths in 2018 and over 2.3 million opioid substance abuse problems in the United States. Between 21 to 29% of people prescribed pharmaceutical-grade opioids for pain and disease misuse enough to develop an addiction. The main problem, though, is that big pharmas refuse to lessen their prescription rate because the market for opioid medication is currently worth millions and soon to be billions by 2026. Common information behind opioids is that opioids are naturally found within the body and don't always have to be synthetic. What really happens isn't explained in sufficient detail. When parts of the brain, there are these special receptors that are made like a lock and key to fit chemicals and proteins for the brain to distribute. Normally, there's a cycle of entry, transmission, exit, and reentry to avoid excessive stimulation of these opioid receptors. Endogenous opioids limit themselves through degradation, but with synthetics, the body accommodates itself to high levels of receptor stimulation and requires more opioids to maintain the high, creating an addiction. Addiction can lead to overdose, abuse of drugs, and creates shock and seizure fits that can be fatal. One of the most common saviors in these instances is the medication Naxalone, better known as Narcan. This life-saving medication is what's called an opioid antagonist, meaning it combats and blocks the effects of fentanyl, heroin, pharmaceutical, or any other opioid within the person's system by binding to the receptors and stopping any stimulation or chemical intake in general. There are multiple ways that can prevent widespread addiction. First, prioritizing addiction education for young adults and teenagers to teach them on how not to get dragged into this situation. Another would be creating laws about how much opioids can be prescribed and limiting how often a certain person can get a prescription. Lastly, the removal of synthetic opioids in general to further the discovery of safer medicine that isn't so detrimental